So the Arrowverse has finally returned after almost an entire year in the shape of Batwoman Season 2, which is almost a complete reboot of the show considering that Ruby Rose stepped down last year and Kane is just gone from the show. So now Javicia Leslie has stepped in as the character of Ryan Wilder, who is the new Batwoman. So this isn't exactly going to be a review of the first 3 episodes, it's more so just my thoughts and how I'm feeling about the show this season. I'll also probably dip into some spoilers from those 3 episodes, so if you haven't seen them or you're planning on it and don't want spoilers, then maybe put this video on hold. So truth be told, I was getting pretty burned out on the Arrowverse shows at the end of their last seasons. I know Flash Season 6 was getting pretty favourable reviews from most people, but between it, Legends, Supergirl and Batwoman all airing weekly, I felt like I was sort of forcing myself to watch them, and I hated that. I don't want to force myself to watch shows I used to love. It was like when Arrow ended, I pretty much just lost my hope and motivation for the Arrowverse, which kind of sucked. But after almost a year break, my interest has been completely rejuvenated, and I'm looking forward to checking out a new episode of Batwoman each week, and so far the episodes have kept my interest for the entire 42-minute runtime, which, says a lot about the episodes. If they were bad episodes, they wouldn't be keeping my interest. And I can't wait for Black Lightning and Superman and Lois and Flash and Supergirl, and yeah, even Legends, to all come back with new episodes. So I'm glad to be hyped again for these shows. Now, Batwoman Season 2 really could have lived or died with these first 3 episodes. The show was already towards the bottom of the Arrowverse list in terms of fans and viewers, because basically Kane and the show in general was not getting the buzz that Cara Danvers or Barry Allen or Sarah Lance were getting for their shows. So Batwoman already was kind of in a little bit of the red, and bringing in a brand new protagonist and phasing out the old one off screen really ran the chance of the show losing the handful of fans and viewers they still had. Now, if Javicia and Ryan weren't to hit, then Batwoman could have crashed and burned within an episode. Now, the character of Ryan didn't exactly knock it out of the park in the premiere, at least for me. A lot of the promos and trailers showed off this very serious, almost Oliver Queen style character, but then in the actual premiere, she was goofy and sort of more like a character we would see on Stargirl. Like, in terms of how she acted to the world, she was kind of closer to, I guess, a Flash character than what you would expect coming out of Batwoman. Now, honestly, this does make a lot of sense, because Kane was the closest in the Arrowverse to Oliver already, so it kind of makes sense that they would want to go in the complete opposite direction with Ryan. But even then, I was a little iffy on what I was seeing with the character. I really did kind of think we were going to see this incredibly badass and serious hero, but she just wasn't exactly that. Now, her character started to grow on me more in episodes 2 and 3, probably because at that point I knew what was happening and the direction her character was going in, and I actually really liked some of the stuff with her in episode 3. Like, there's a scene where Ryan goes to Victor Zsasz without the suit, and it's actually probably my favourite scene of her yet, because of how she acted and how it was the first time I felt that her character was in control of the situation and she wasn't just winging it. But in terms of Kane, I think that how they began to handle the situation has been good. She didn't just disappear from the show completely, because her presence is still very much felt in pretty much every arc. The mystery of who killed her is something that is looming, and I think it's interesting enough to make for a season-long story. My one issue, though, is that the revelation that the many characters think that Kate is still alive, because depending on how this plays out, this could either be a mistake that makes the overall season feel like a waste or some of the arcs in the season not work, or it could lead to a satisfying end. Now, the only way I could see this leading to a satisfying conclusion is if it ends with Ruby Rose returning for at least an episode, just to show that yes, she's still alive, and maybe she shows up at the end of the season after we resolve the mystery. Maybe she could even give her blessing to Ryan, and then she leaves the show completely, with the door left open for Ruby to return for crossovers, or maybe again on the show much further down the line. Now, however, if they cannot get Ruby to return to the role, and this storyline ends with Kate actually being dead, or if she's alive but just doesn't appear, then this is going to be a pretty unfortunate and disappointing way for the season to go, in my opinion. I just kind of hope that maybe they've secured a deal for Ruby to make one final appearance already, because if not, then the writers may have just put themselves in a corner that could be pretty frustrating for us fans. Another thing I was kind of pretty worried about was Alice's storyline for this season, especially since her whole storyline last season was to be the foil to Kate. And Alice is one of the best parts of the show. She has such a charismatic way of being a villain, almost like Thawne or Chase, so I was kind of worried that losing Kate would take away from her character. But Alice still remains as one of the best parts of the show, and one of the characters that I truly enjoy watching. Like, her arc this season is still very much driven by Kate and Jacob, but I'm enjoying her path, and considering her actions in these episodes, I'm wondering if she's going to end up becoming more of an anti-hero than a straight-up villain. But either way, I'm glad she's still a great part of the show. Speaking of Jacob, though, he hasn't gotten a lot to do these episodes, but I am intrigued to see where they take his story, but I just don't think we've seen enough to talk about what he's really been up to yet. He's kind of taken a backseat to the other characters this season. His whole thing so far has been like, I want to find Kate, and he gets maybe 2 scenes an episode devoted to that arc. Now, moving on to the new villains for a second, Warren Christie has entered the show as Hush, masquerading as Bruce Wayne, which means we have our first Earth Prime look at the Arrowverse Batman, and I'm very impressed with what I saw. The way Elliot plays Bruce is kind of like an insight into what the normal Bruce Wayne would be if Bruce was just the party boy true and true with no vigilante stuff at all. I also loved how other characters reacted to thinking they were talking to Bruce, like Jacob, Luke, and Julia. The scene with Julia was particularly great because we heard a little bit more about Alfred. Honestly though, if we ever see Alfred show up in these shows, could it please be Jack Bannon from the Pennyworth show, because that guy and that show in general is just so good, and I think he's probably my favourite version of Alfred. So maybe just give him a bit of old makeup, have him show up, and maybe even confirm that Pennyworth takes place on Earth Prime. Please. But anyway, I'm excited for when Bruce will full on show up in the show, because there's no ifs or buts in my opinion. He definitely will show up at some stage. The question is whether or not he'll be the Dark Knight, but the whole situation on this show kind of reminds me of early Supergirl, because in Supergirl season 1 they always said no Superman, and then we just saw him in weird blurry flashbacks. Pretty much exactly how we see Batman in season 1. There's even kind of a correlation with Supergirl season 1 with how Clark sends Kara kind of just text messages, kind of similar to how Kate has been looking at like letters from Bruce and all that quite a lot. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities here. And Supergirl eventually built up to Superman's debut, so I think it's only a matter of time before the same happens on Batwoman. I think it would make a really cool final season story, like Ryan and the team finding out where Bruce is, but he's completely destroyed or just not the guy they remember. Maybe even get Kate involved somehow. An even cooler story could be that like there's a revelation that Kate's disappearance is related to Bruce's and that someone is taking down Bat People or something. But Victor Zsasz also made his debut, and I thought he was a very fun villain to watch. I'm definitely expecting him to return. Speaking of that, actually, I was very surprised that Warren Christie got written out of the show in one episode, so I kind of hope he comes back because he was great. But I think he got taken down a little too easy, this Victor Zsasz, I mean. But I'm going to talk that up to him being overconfident and having the mindset that no way this new Batwoman could beat him. Because one of my issues here is that at the beginning, Luke had no idea who Zsasz was. And at first I was like, okay, maybe Zsasz is just a relatively new villain in this universe. But then I remembered Zsasz's line at the beginning about how he's close to retirement. And then even towards the end of the episode, we hear Zsasz mention how he's fought Batman at one point. Does that mean Zsasz has been around for at least 7 years since Batman disappeared 5 years before Elseworld, which is already 2 years ago? So Zsasz has probably even been around a little bit longer than that, because, like, you know, we got to assume that Zsasz wasn't one of the final villains Batman fought. But I just feel like Luke should have a pretty good idea or understanding of most of Batman's rogue gallery, and Zsasz should also be kind of well known to people other than Ryan, I feel like. Safiyah also finally made her debut after being a looming threat at the end of last season, and I'm honestly a little bit iffy on this storyline in particular for a couple of reasons. Now, I know she's a relatively new character in the DC Comics world, but her presence in the show seems like just a mix of numerous elements of Arrow put together. Like, her island seems like if Nanda Parbat existed on Lian. Her whole getup and army of people seem like a combination of Talia, Rage, and even a bit of Damien Dark in there. Like, the way her like henchmen kind of people are dressed up kind of reminds me of Hive. Like, it just feels to me that there's nothing incredibly original or unique with her story thus far. We even found out that 5 years ago Alice trained with Safaya on this island, and that's already giving me serious flashbacks to Sarah and Nissa in the early years of Arrow. So the only thing about her story that I'm feeling is cool is that she's somehow involved with Kate and how she somehow has one of Kate's necklaces. Anyway, besides that, I think that the show has done a good way of setting up future episodes. Like, we've already gotten hints at some of the future stuff already, and we've already gotten a Black Mask name drop, which confirms that he's a relatively new villain and likely hasn't been a part of Batman's rogue gallery. One of Joker's paintings is involved with all of this mess somehow, so that's a very interesting reveal. We're getting hints at the original Scarecrow storyline, since so much of this stuff so far involves toxins, and Scarecrow has even been name dropped. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Bat's attack from episode 1 was actually meant to be a hallucination by Scarecrow's toxin and they had to change it last minute. So I want to know why they decided to write Scarecrow and not have him involved in the story at all. Other than all that though, they've already kind of sidelined the Kryptonite plot, which is a little disappointing. It was really interesting, they were setting it up well, and then it just kind of disappeared after the end of episode 1, so I'm hoping that comes back soon. But yeah, Batwoman Season 2 could have started a lot worse. It's been a solid 3 episodes, and while there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, I think there's more than enough elements here to make this season an interesting and enjoyable one. But how are you feeling about Batwoman Season 2 so far? And if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and have a great day.